Yaron Weitzman wrote a whole book about the 76ers. It's called Tanking to the Top. I read it. I actually listened to it.
So you didn't read it? You listened.
Does it count as reading the book if I listen to the book?
Very interesting question. Because if you listen to a podcast,
I listened to it.
yeah, you don't read it.
So I didn't read the book. I listened to the book.
Yeah, you listen to it.
Okay, it was very good, and I would recommend it to many people out there.
Is it his voice?
Yaron's voice is the voice that reads it to you.
Oh, there you go. That's
now,
awesome.
that's like, it happens sometimes. Some books I've listened to, they have someone like me read it, who has like a really cool voice.
Do you like his
Yaron
voice?
read it, and I didn't like it. No, I'm just kidding. And he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Yaron Weitzman. What's up, pal?
I think I make more money off the audiobook anyway, so that works.
Yeah, see, there he goes. He makes more money off that book.
Okay, all right.
I might be wrong about that, though, so yeah, who knows. But, my voice, beautiful, right?
Yeah. Well, next time you write a book, if you want a cool voice, I'll do it for you.
You know what? It was one of the most tedious things I've done. I might take you up on that.
I would imagine reading that whole thing, like having to do like perfection like that. The book was called Tanking to the Top. They obviously have not reached the top. They've now fired the coach who was a part of that. I know you always get asked, did it work? It's not. That's not what I'm asking you. The question I might ask you, though, would be, where did it go off course?
That's a good one. There is a million reasons why, right? Like, so in the book, I kind of outlined some themes that have been brought up recently. So, Josh Richardson mentioned the culture of accountability, and that I think was a major. And you probably agree, right? That was one of the major themes in the book. Something that, as I'm reporting, you kind of see these through lines. Kind of call it the original sin of the Sixers, right? Just no accountability, and there are lots of reasons for that and context and different people to blame. But if you're asking me, I would say that's one, the idea of things getting out of hand, and that, the Jahlil Okafor thing was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back and led to Sam Hinkie being ousted. And if you look at it, Sam Hinkie being ousted, I think, is where it went wrong. Not necessarily because Hinkie, we could argue about Hinkie and how good he is and smart and all that. But something changed when he was gone, and the timeline was accelerated in a way that I think changed things. So Brian Colangelo came in and made a really big point about chasing free agents, and they're trading an extra lottery pick to go get Markelle Fultz. And then after that doesn't work, they're kind of chasing their own tail, and they want to win a championship. So then they're trading for Jimmy Butler, and then they're trading more draft picks for Tobias Harris, and then they're going after Al Horford because they think he's the perfect piece as opposed to being more organic. They think he's the perfect piece. And they start basically chasing this championship thing instead of letting it build slowly. So I think that would be my answer.
Yeah, it's almost like, you mentioned Horford and Harris. It was almost like, hey, Horford's very good at defending Giannis, and he defends Joel Embiid, so let's just take him away from them so that they don't have, they didn't build a team with the vision of what they wanted to do. They built a team with the vision to try to not let teams do things against them.
Yeah, and it was one thing I'll add, and I think the phrase I use is a narrow point of view, right? So it was that. The other thing was, against the Raptors, if you oversimplify it, they lost because when Joel Embiid was off the floor, they were outscored by like 100 points, per 100 possessions or whatever, some ridiculous number. They got killed, crushed every time Embiid was off the floor. So the idea being the two things you mentioned, plus, okay, now we'll get the best backup center. That will fix it. Assume like nothing else changes. Look, we're good. We're golden, right? We're set up. We plugged all our holes, and we helped neutralize our primary opponents. And it's, that's not – and I was guilty of this too. I kind of, before the year, remember talking to people and being like, oh, it will obviously be the Sixers and the Bucks in the conference finals, then who knows? And that, with basketball is very chalky. The top teams advance often, but it's not but things happen, and we saw that this year, not even including how the whole season is, the pandemic and everything else going on, but just in general, things happen, things change, injuries happen, teams mesh, they don't, and I think the Sixers attacked last offseason with a very narrow perspective.
I definitely got sucked into thinking that this would work better than it did too, but where do they go from here? Like, how big of an issue was the collaboration that Elton Brand just spoke about when it comes to the front office decisions? Do you feel that now, since Brand has the final say, that this is the right direction to go down?
Okay, so I would say Elton Brand, people like him. He is smart. He's likable. I think he's a genuinely good person, most people would say. And I think having him as your sole voice, or in general, having a sole voice is usually a better way of doing things, right? Especially if it's a basketball person. Is Elton Brand good at evaluating talent or, navigating the salary cap or knowing when to go risk and when not and all that stuff? We shall see, right? We don't know. He's new to this. We don't know. So that part, when it's hard to say, but I do think they're ahead of the game in the fact that they no longer have input from the business side of things on basketball decisions, that they no longer have maybe a brand feels more empowered to make decisions. They don't have minority, when this wasn't last year, but they don't have a minority owner telling them to trade for Zaire Smith, things like that. I think it puts you in a better position for sure.
You mentioned about kind of, and I don't want to say whether process worked, didn't work, because I don't think it's fair to even judge that. But the messaging drastically changed once Sam walked out the door, right? Colangelo wanted nothing to do with this. So at that point, it's really not fair to suggest whether their grand plan would have worked, would not have worked. We'll never know that. But it is fair to say that Colangelo wanted nothing to do with staying on that path, correct?
Yeah, for sure. He took some swipes. I forgot the quote. He was on Wojnarowski's then Yahoo podcast and said something along the lines of now winning is going to be a priority now, or so I forget. He phrased it. It was even more of a jab than that, right? So after he came in, he made it very clear that he wanted to go a different direction. Partly because I think he thought they should. He didn't believe in the idea of tanking. Partly because, and we would learn this later, right? He is somebody who very much cares what people think, and I think it was very big the idea of putting his handprints on there and this being his team and him being known as the one who saved it all from Sam Hinkie and who turned it around and won a championship. I think that mattered a lot to him.
Yeah, and the one thing is, as you wrote recently, about the fact that they wasted this bright future. We'll never know what Sam's vision was, but he certainly set Colangelo, followed by Brand, up with enough pieces to whether you want to judge the process or not. Those guys certainly made a lot of mistakes with the things that Sam gave them.
For sure. I mean, there's three big moves, or 3.5, right? There's the Fultz trade, which 2 lottery picks for 1, basically. Sam Hinkie never would have done. I'm always a little – it obviously blew up. I'm always a little weary of criticizing Colangelo completely for that, just because, 99 – basically everybody except Danny Ainge and the Celtics had Markelle Fultz as a top pick in that draft. Nobody foresaw this coming. And if Markelle Fultz became the player that I'll say, let's say 98% of NBA talent evaluators believe he'd be, that would have been the perfect bridge, the perfect sidekick to Embiid and Simmons, right? So, but there was that trade. There was the Tobias Harris trade where they gave up a ton of picks and assets for a guy who the Clippers weren't going to re-sign. He was an impending free agent. The Clippers, they weren't going to re-sign because they wanted to get Kawhi and Paul George, right? So the Sixers had leverage there. They did not use it. I always go back to the fact that trade, it was a trade deadline trade, but it was made like 2 days before the deadline. And it's kind of like, if you're in a fantasy football league and you call somebody else and they make a trade, they accept it without going anywhere else and without shopping to anyone. I feel like you should be like, hey, yes, can you put this through now? Like, that's probably not a good sign for you. So there was that trade and that contract, which obviously is not great. And then there was the more so than moving off of Jimmy Butler, because that was complicated and there are valid reasons for the Sixers to have decided not to have brought back Jimmy Butler. But it was then allocating those resources to bringing in another center and Al Horford, right? So it's really the Tobias thing, the Al Horford thing, and the Markelle Fultz thing.
Now, Yaron, there's been a lot of discussion about the Jimmy Butler stuff, that him and Brown didn't get along. I think that's pretty obvious. And some people suggest that Brown had a hand in basically why Butler wasn't here and that the Sixers really tried to strong-arm him. Now, you had written the other day that Brown kind of came to terms that Butler didn't get along, he would have been okay with Butler coming back. So what kind of role do you think Brown had in Butler not being there?
It's really, really hard to discern. I mean, even the reporting and all the details and what everyone's not even reporting, like when you talk to people involved, right, every side or all the different sides are pushing different things, which you get, and that's what happens. My read on it and my understanding is that, Brown and Butler, it was very clear that they did not get along during the season. And as anyone who's listened to either of them speak about the other since the breakup, you don't need me to tell you that, right? It's been very obvious.
From your understanding, is that just Butler being Butler, or were there other players who just did not get, like, is Brown a tough guy to get along with? In other words.
No, not a tough guy to get along with. Like the players like him for the most part. They just, it's like what Josh Richardson said. He's nice for the most part. There are some who he's had issues with, for sure. Some veterans and stuff like that who have been in and out. I think most of the guys who are there, if you think of the key pieces, they all, for the most part, like him and get along with him as a person, right? Nice man. What was that what Josh Richardson said? He's a nice man. And most think he's a really nice guy. I don't know if the respect was there as a head coach by the end, right? And that's a different kind of thing. And Butler has spoken to that. J.J. Redick has said he's never said it outright. But like when Butler's talking about that stuff on his podcast, he's saying, I never had a problem with Brett, but he's not exactly sticking up for him vociferously. And Embiid last year gave this whole speech in Butler. It was, this whole speech supporting Brett Brown after the season when he was asked about Brown's job status. This year, that was not the case. And I think Ben Simmons was annoyed about some of the shooting stuff when Brett Brown would ask publicly, Ben, I would tell his agent and brother I want to see a 3 every game. And we don't see another 3 again from Simmons, and I believe that comment bothers Simmons. So going back to your question, so Butler most got along, I think, but Butler's somebody like, if he feels you're not doing your job properly, he will go at you, fair or not, right? There are different. Sometimes it's fair, sometimes it's not. But that was definitely an issue between the two of them. Also, Brown is non-confrontational, especially with players, and Butler is the exact opposite, we could say. So those created issues. So I think, but Brown, it wasn't a secret in the building that he did not enjoy coaching Butler and that it was a problem for him. He didn't like it. He probably said at times, I can't do it. Let's move off of it. My understanding is at the end he wanted to make clear that he'd be okay with Butler coming back. But just saying you're okay with something doesn't mean that management thinks it's going to work, right? That's where it's kind of a gray line. And yes, I can say he said it's okay. It doesn't mean that he didn't have a role in Butler not coming back. If that makes sense.
When we talk about tanking and the process, we all look back and go, oh, it gave us Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. That's huge. We have the 2 cornerstone guys. Do you think that it's time now to maybe think about moving on from one of them?
I wouldn't. I think what's interesting and I guess maybe disheartening is the word about the conversation now is in the past, the conversation about should you trade one of them was always about the fit, right? Like, can these 2 players who have clashing skills who are not best of friends, can you win a championship with these 2 guys? Now, that's still part of the question, but I also think the question has to be, we're a little strapped here. We're capped out. We don't have a ton of draft picks left. We don't have much ways. There isn't much wiggle room, or we don't have many ways out of some of the Horford-type contracts, Tobias contracts, whatever it is, the fit issues we have on this team. Is trading one of those 2 our best way out, right? I think that has to be part of the conversation, and that's where things have changed now.
Yaron Weitzman's our guest. He wrote the book Tanking to the Top, and I encourage you to read the book or listen to the book if you choose to do that. There's so much in there that you'll learn, and it's hard. This has been a topic that has been so discussed, but you found so many things in there. Now, to go to did it work, did it not work? Again, I don't think it's fair to answer that question. But when people ask me, Yaron, this is what I tell them. I say, if you ask the ownership group, they would have to say it worked. Not only did it work, it was a grand slam home run out of the park, out of the stadium. They are one of the most relevant teams in the entire league. They are on national television all the time. They are one of the top-selling apparel teams in all of basketball. Now, that doesn't win you championships. That doesn't win you things. But isn't that part of what the organization wanted? This team had no relevancy. There was apathy from the fan base. No one cared about them. And when they did this, that all changed. So if you asked Josh Harris, wouldn't he say, "You're damn right it worked. Look at my bank account"?
I agree, and I think the people I would add to that conversation, even though they might not realize it, are fans, right? If you're a fan, your team matters. They might frustrate the hell out of you sometimes, right? But I know the conversation is sometimes, well, they haven't gotten further than the Drew Holiday Sixers or whatever.
Which is
but
fair.
You can't tell me, but you can't tell me as a fan that you approach these 2 teams or that you consume these 2 teams the same way, right? That was like, oh, let's see what we can do. Maybe we'll upset here. There'll be some injuries here. This team, you're expecting fans are upset because it's a quote-unquote contender, right? You're expecting a championship. There are 2 superstars on that team.
Right. You enter the season with 2 different mindsets. You enter the playoffs with 2 different – back then, you entered the playoffs, they're not winning anyway. Now, if they lose, you're pissed.
Yeah, listen, and imagine if you're a fan, you want to watch, you're listening to this radio hit right now, right? You're going home, you're watching every game, you're scheduling around it, things like that. Anyone who's a fan knows the difference between following a team that's a championship contender that's not. Like, hey, I'm a Mets fan, right? I know the difference, and the Mets they're a joke half the time, right? But I know the difference when the team is a legitimate shot to win, and I'm spending every summer night I'm organizing my schedule around the Mets, and when they're just blah, and I just don't care.
So being a Mets fan. Do you, and knowing the Sixers so well, do you want Josh Harris to buy the Mets?
I think this is what's it that you don't blank where you eat, right? I am as conflicted as can be on all of this, right?
Gotcha.
I guess that's how I put that.
To go to something that has to do with maybe Harris, I mean, in the book, and it was brought up the other day, Broge, you kind of touched on a little bit, but how impactful was it that Brand went out of his way to squash any collaboration efforts? He mentioned he was asked by somebody about Scott O'Neal. You chronicle that in the book. Do you think that was a very impactful, or that was a important message from Brand for people who might not know what that question was even about?
I do, because there are enough people who do know what the question's about, right? And I think it's a shot to them, or I guess I'll say a message to them, right? Like a message or peace sign to them, peace offering, to them. I think it matters, right? And he's saying, and it was about Scott O'Neal, and it was about, his deputies and stuff, and executives in the office, in the front office, and him saying, and I'm sure part of it is, listen, this is how you're going to paint it, right? You're going to paint it as things didn't go well. Well, that wasn't me. Now this is going to be me, right? So I get it. There's a political move there, but I actually think there's a lot of truth to it. As well, if not it being all true. And Scott O'Neal he's a Sixer, for those who don't know, Sixers, or he's actually the Harris Blitzer Sports Group, I believe, CEO, but Sixer CEO, and he's been involved in basketball decisions for a while. He played a role in Sam Hinkie being pushed out. He's big on he likes the basketball decisions because he wants them to go a certain way so he can market the team. Like there's a story from the Hinkie days of O'Neal being furious because Hinkie traded Michael Carter-Williams, and O'Neal thought he didn't get enough notice, and a flyer or a marketing campaign had just gone out with Michael Carter-Williams in the middle. So things like that, which, it's sometimes, and I think the Sixers and O'Neal are guilty of this sometimes, of forgetting that the product is a basketball team. They do all this innovation lab, the marketing, and they go to this phone conference and talk about all the things they're doing. But the product is a basketball team. The only reason anyone cares about what the Philadelphia 76ers do off the court is because they're a basketball team that matters. And I think if you don't let that govern your decisions, you can run into issues, and that has been an issue in Philadelphia for a while.
Okay, real quick, I have about a minute, but I want to get your opinion on this. This used to be, if Brett Brown had gotten fired in any of the previous 2 or 3 years, this would be one of the most attractive jobs. Is it still for the next coach? Do people going to say, I want to coach that team?
Yes and no, right? So it's going to be the Nets, the Pelicans, and the Sixers are the 3 jobs, right? Like big names, contenders, or whatever, Pelicans, whatever. Big names, playoffs, stuff like that. The Sixers, listen, if you win, you'll be a god. I think people are not wary, but they would go in open-minded, knowing that there have been issues with the ownership in terms of meddling. The front office has been a little funky, and those 2 superstars have proven themselves not easy to coach, right? So it's still a big-time job. You have 2 superstars. Coaches want to win. But it's a little. I guess it's not it's not an easy take, I guess is how I would describe it.
All right, we'll keep our eyes on that. Yaron Weitzman, the book is called Tanking to the Top. It is the arduous process that you have never seen before, and it never really actually finished. So check out why it didn't finish and some of the things that happened along the way. And he was kind enough to join us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Yaron, appreciate the time as always.
Thanks, guys. Anytime.